My daughter told me not to come to her wedding after I drained $115,000 from my savings to pay for it. Her words cut deeper than any knife. Then her fiancé mocked me, his voice echoing through the hall filled with guests. They thought I was broken, powerless, finished. But they were wrong. I walked in with a special guest, and what happened next left everyone stunned. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're listening from in the comments. Richard sat alone in the living room that evening, the late sun spilling through the curtains, painting long golden lines across the carpet. The old armchair creaked beneath my weight as I leaned back, staring at the framed photo of Margaret on the mantel. Her smile had always been steady, reassuring, a promise that no matter how rough life became, we'd get through it together. Now, without her, the house felt cavernous, the silence too sharp. On the coffee table, I had spread the receipts like puzzle pieces, each one carrying a memory of sacrifice. $60,000 for Emily's college tuition, money I'd worked overtime for, missing weekends and holidays just so my daughter could graduate debt-free. $20,000 for the car she wanted in her junior year, the red one she swore would carry her safely to classes and back. And then the big one, $115,000, every penny of my retirement savings, for the wedding, she said, would be the happiest day of her life. I had handed over the checks without hesitation, believing that happiness was worth more than numbers in a bank account. Yet, sitting in that chair, all I could feel was emptiness. The phone call from Nora still rang in my ears. Her cheerful tone had cracked open a truth I wasn't prepared for. "Richard, I'm flying in for Emily's wedding tomorrow. I just can't decide what to wear," she had chirped. I remember gripping the fork in my hand so tightly that the meatloaf slipped off and fell onto the plate. Tomorrow? That single word echoed like a hammer against steel. Tomorrow, not next week. Tomorrow, a secret ceremony I hadn't been told about, hadn't been invited to. My chest had tightened as Nora stumbled over her words, trying to soften the blow, saying maybe it was a miscommunication, maybe Emily had meant to tell me. But I knew better. Emily never missed our Tuesday calls, not once. She had told me everything about the flowers, the dress, and the menu, but she hadn't told me this, which meant it wasn't a mistake. It was deliberate. That realization cut deeper than any knife. I was her father, the man who raised her alone after Margaret passed, and yet I had been erased from her wedding like an unwanted footnote. I stared at the receipts again, the ink smudged in places where my hands had trembled. My savings were gone, drained dry for a celebration I was excluded from. The only thing left was this house, the two-story brick home Margaret and I bought 40 years ago, worth $500,000 now, maybe more. Every corner of it carried our history. The kitchen still smelled faintly of her pies in the autumn. The wooden floors in the hall bore scratches from Emily's roller skates when she was 10. The oak tree out front had grown tall and strong, just like I had hoped Emily would, and yet even this home no longer felt safe. I could see the way Jason looked at it during their last visit, his eyes calculating, measuring. To him, it wasn't a family home. It was equity, an asset, something to sell when I was no longer useful. I knew, sitting there, that the house wasn't just a home anymore. It was the next target, and the thought of them conspiring to strip me of it filled me with a mixture of grief and rage that made my hands shake. The conversation with Emily haunted me. I could still hear her voice over the phone, clipped, professional, like she was delivering bad news in a boardroom rather than speaking to her father. "Dad, tomorrow is just paperwork, a small ceremony with Jason's relatives. Our real wedding is next Saturday. That's when we'll celebrate together." Paperwork. That was the word she used, as if exchanging vows was a trip to the DMV. I remember whispering, "Nothing special enough to include me?" My throat burned with the effort to keep my voice calm. She got defensive then, saying it was complicated, saying Jason's family had scheduling conflicts, saying it wasn't about me. But it was. Every syllable told me that she had chosen to side with him, to let him dictate who mattered and who didn't. I was her father, and she had cast me aside like a worn-out coat. The bond between us, the late-night talks, the shared grief after Margaret's passing, the trust I thought was unbreakable, it had been severed in a single phone call. And the knife wasn't just Jason's, it was hers too. For a long while I sat in that silence, drowning in betrayal. But somewhere inside the ache, something shifted. The grief hardened into resolve. Jason's fingerprints were all over this scheme. I could see it clearly now. The flattery, the way he had pushed for a bigger wedding, the charm he used when asking me for more money, saying it was an investment in family. It was never about family. It was about control, about squeezing every drop of value from me until I was dry. Margaret had warned me, her voice echoing from years past. "Richard, don't let people take advantage of that generous heart of yours." I whispered back to her photo, "You were right, Maggie. I should have listened." But I wasn't finished. Not yet. I knew this wasn't just about being excluded from a wedding. This was about being erased, about being stripped of dignity, of property, of my role as a father, and I wasn't going to let that happen. I rose from the armchair, the old wood groaning beneath me, and crossed to Margaret's cabinet. Inside, tucked between insurance files and tax returns, was a folder I hadn't opened in years. My hands shook slightly as I pulled it out, spreading the papers across the coffee table. The deed to the house, insurance documents, bank records. Every page felt like a weapon, a shield, proof that I wasn't powerless. My eyes stung as I poured a glass of Margaret's favorite whiskey, the bottle I had been saving for a special occasion. I raised it toward her picture. "Margaret, they think I'm weak. They think they've won, but they don't know me as well as they think they do." The whiskey burned down my throat, hot and clean, and I felt the first spark of determination ignite. I wasn't going to sit by and watch Jason steal my daughter and my life's work. I wasn't going to let Emily believe this was acceptable. I would fight back, not with shouting or fists, but with proof, with strategy, with the kind of patience only a man my age could wield. The living room seemed different then, less like a tomb and more like a command center. The lamp's glow fell across the documents, lighting up words like ownership, beneficiary, and liability. My house wasn't just four walls and a roof. It was leverage. It was protection. It was my line in the sand. I ran my hand over the coffee table, the same one where Emily used to do her homework, and I felt the weight of every memory pressing against me. This was my family's history, and I wasn't going to let Jason reduce it to numbers in a spreadsheet. I looked again at Margaret's photo. "You always said I was too soft," I whispered, "but maybe soft men can still fight. Maybe softness just means we fight differently." My voice cracked, but my resolve didn't. By the time the clock struck midnight, the decision was made. I couldn't change the fact that Emily had chosen to hide her wedding from me. I couldn't undo the sting of her words, but I could make sure Jason never got his hands on this house, on the last piece of my life that still belonged to me. I could make sure that when they looked at me, they wouldn't see a helpless old man. They would see someone who had more left in him than they ever expected. The papers lay ready, the whiskey glass empty, and my heart, though bruised, beat with a new rhythm. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning. And I knew, as I turned off the lamp and let the house sink into darkness, that tomorrow I would act. I would not be erased. If you're still watching and find this story interesting, please comment 1 below to let me know you're here with me. I woke before the sun and sat at the end of the bed with my feet on the cold floor, listening to the old house breathe. Pipes clicked. The furnace hummed. Somewhere, a floorboard popped like it always did at daybreak, the little groan Margaret used to joke about as if the house stretched after a long sleep. I stared at her photo on the dresser. That smile of hers still carried more steadiness than any sermon. "Morning, Maggie," I whispered. "Today, I move." The word felt odd in my mouth, like a gear finally catching after too much grinding. I dressed, brewed coffee, and carried the mug into the living room. The documents I'd laid out last night waited on the coffee table beneath the yellow lamp. Deed, insurance, old bank statements, receipts for Emily's tuition, $60,000 across 4 years. The title for her red car, $20,000 even, out the door after I haggled 3 hours with a salesman who kept calling me Buddy. And the stack of wedding payments totaled $115,000. I spread my hand over them the way a man checks a fence line. This was the pasture I had to guard now. I made the first call at 8 sharp. The bank's hold music was the same bright tune I'd heard for 30 years, a cheerful loop that never matched the pressure in my chest. When the agent came on, her voice had the soft shape of someone trained to calm storms. I gave my name, the last 4 digits, and the answer to a security question Margaret had chosen years ago, the name of our first dog. When she asked how she could help, I told her straight. I needed the savings account frozen, effective immediately. She asked why, and I told her I had reason to believe my future son-in-law had accessed funds without my authorization. She grew careful then. She said she'd pull the recent activity. There was a pause, long enough for me to hear the clock in the kitchen count out 12 seconds. When she spoke again, her tone had changed. There'd been an external transfer of $5,000 at 6:17 a.m. 3 days earlier to an entity called Green Holdings. Memo line, venue upgrade. My hand tightened on the phone. I asked how a transfer like that could happen. She said it was initiated online from a recognized device, a new payee added last week. She asked if I'd added it. I didn't need to think. No. She noted the statement. She began a claim, read me a case number, and promised to freeze the remaining $45,000 at once, pending investigation. I'll also place a verbal password on your profile, she said. No changes or withdrawals without it. I thanked her. I wrote the password on the back of an old utility bill. It wasn't Margaret's name or Emily's name. It was the word boundary. After we hung up, I sat in quiet, the anger rising like heat through a floor vent. $5,000 wasn't just money. It was proof. Proof that Jason felt so sure of his control, he'd reach into my pocket without bothering to look over his shoulder. I stared at the memo line again in my mind. Venue upgrade. I pictured him at some sleek bar, phone in hand, scrolling through my history like a man shopping, ordering a little more of what he wanted. My jaw clenched. So that's the kind of man you are, I said to the empty room. You don't just take, you test. The thought steadied me. A test has an answer. I called Emily next, though I let the phone ring twice while I practiced the first sentence in my head. Keep it calm, keep it clear. Don't let him push you off your ground. When she answered, her voice had that bright lift it gets when she's managing a crisis at work and wants everyone to believe the ship is steady. I told her we needed to talk about money. I said the number plainly, the way a man should when he wants truth to stand up straight. $115,000 for the wedding, Em, and $5,000 more I did not authorize. She went silent. Then she gave me words that were smooth and slippery, something about a misunderstanding, about Jason handling logistics. I asked her how a man who hadn't earned a single dollar on my account put his hands on it. My voice didn't rise, not once. I kept it low, the way Dad kept his voice low when the day required respect. She said it was just a temporary thing, that the vendor needed a quick payment, that they'd planned to reimburse me. She called it a bridge. I pictured a cheap plank over deep water. Jason came on the line then. I could hear the room change and the quality of the air on the call, the way it always does when a man steps too close to a microphone. He didn't say hello. He asked me why I was making things difficult, as if I were an employee who had misfiled a form. He said the $5,000 was trivial in the scope of a 6-figure event and that I needed to let the professionals do their jobs. Professionals. I let him speak until he ran out of confidence. Then I told him the account was frozen. The silence lasted 2 beats. He laughed, the short, sharp kind, and said I was overreacting. He said I needed to trust him. I said trust is watched over by math. I told him I wanted a detailed ledger by the close of business. I told him I wanted the $5,000 back in 72 hours. I told him I wanted Emily to confirm in writing that there would be no further charges to my name, not for the wedding, not for anything. He said something about my embarrassing myself in front of his network. I said I'd rather embarrass myself than bankrupt myself. My voice didn't shake. When I hung up, I felt the line go lighter, as if a weight had lifted. It wasn't peace yet, but it was posture. The house felt taller when I stood up. I took the deed from the coffee table and slipped it into a folder, along with the last property tax bill, my insurance declarations page, and an old letter from the county recorder welcoming us to a fraud alert program Margaret had signed us up for back when a neighbor got his title compromised. I put on my jacket and locked the door behind me, that heavy deadbolt thudding in a way I liked. The morning air smelled like wet leaves and coffee. I drove to my attorney's office on Maple Avenue, the same red brick building where I signed papers when we refinanced 20 years ago to help cover tuition. The glass door still stuck in summer and swung too freely in winter. Today, it stuck. Linda Park greeted me in the lobby with that measured kindness lawyers learn to carry. She'd drawn up our wills the year Margaret got sick. She knew the map of my life better than most people left on it. I sat across from her at a walnut table and placed the folder between us like a flag. I told her everything, not in a flood, but in a clear stream. The secret ceremony, the erased invitation, the $5,000 transfer to Green Holdings. She listened the way good doctors listen, with her eyes. Then she asked for the facts she needed. Was the house in my sole name or joint? Sole, since Margaret's passing, with the title recorded in my name as fee simple absolute. Did I have any powers of attorney in place naming Emily? No. We had drafted a medical proxy years ago, naming Margaret first, then Linda herself as backup. But no financial power of attorney was currently active. Did I intend to pass the house to Emily when I died? Yes, but not before. Not to a man who measured families by how easily he could rearrange their furniture. Linda opened a file on her screen and began typing, her voice even as she narrated the steps. We would place a transfer on death designation on the house, sometimes called a beneficiary deed, so that upon my passing, the property would transfer cleanly to Emily, but until then, nobody could sell or encumber it without my signature. We would also create a revocable living trust, with me as trustee and sole beneficiary during my life, naming contingent beneficiaries in a way that allowed me to change my mind if people proved themselves unworthy. The trust would own the house tomorrow, once we executed the deed. It would take it off the chessboard today. Meanwhile, she'd enroll me in the county's property fraud alert service again, updated with my cell number and email, so any recorded document touching my parcel would trigger notifications. She said we could file a simple affidavit of possession to establish another layer of notice in the record, not required, but protective. Then we'd update my will to mirror the trust. Nothing exotic, simple layers, strong layers. She asked if I'd ever signed anything for Jason. Anything resembling a quitclaim deed, even an event form, something he might try to reframe in court. I shook my head. The only things I'd signed for the wedding were checks and a credit card slip when the florist insisted. Linda's mouth flattened in a way I've come to read as approval. Good, she said. You've kept your pen honest. As we worked, she asked how I was doing. Not the kind of question people toss out while glancing at a clock, but the real kind. The one that lands in your chest and waits for an honest answer. I told her the truth. I was hurt. I was angry. But I was not confused anymore. She nodded and slid a document toward me. It was the warranty deed from when Margaret and I purchased the house. She placed beside it a new deed titled Trustee's Deed, with my name in a different position now. Power looks different on paper when you move it into a structure that answers to your hand only. She printed a one-page letter addressed to the bank, authorizing a security freeze on external transfers and revoking any implied consent to third parties, even my daughter, until further written instruction. She stood, said, "Let's walk to the notary," and I followed her down the hall where a woman in a navy blazer stamped the documents and watched me sign. I felt my hand get steadier with each signature. The pen looked like a small thing, but today it was a tool a man uses to hoist a beam back into place after a storm. When we finished, Linda slid the stack into a big envelope and wrote my name across the front. She told me she'd courier the deed to the recorder by noon. "You'll get a text when it's recorded," she said. "By sunset, your house will be exactly where you want it, and harder to touch." I thanked her. I meant it. On the way home, I pulled into the diner on the corner, the one with the chipped chrome and the pies that taste like the fair. I took a booth, somewhere with a line of sight to the door. Old habit. The waitress poured coffee without asking, bless her, and I ate eggs I barely tasted, though the toast was good and the butter tasted like summer. I scrolled through my phone for a second and stopped on a photo of Emily, age 8, missing front teeth, holding a pumpkin the size of her torso. I put the phone face down and let the memory sit beside me like a polite bear. When the check came, I left cash and drove home. Back at the house, I found myself walking room to room as if I needed to see everything I was defending. The nicks on the banister, the tiny scorch mark on the kitchen counter from the time Margaret left the kettle whistling a beat too long while she danced me around in my socks. The dent in the hallway baseboard is where I once bumped a bookcase while painting the ceiling. I stood at the window and watched a pair of sparrows work the old oak tree for threads, tugging, building. "That's the work," I said out loud. "Build, guard, build again." My phone buzzed. A text from Linda. "Deed recorded, confirmation to follow." Another buzz followed it, a sign-up link for the county fraud alerts. I clicked and entered the parcel number and my phone number. Done. My spine lengthened. It's a strange thing how a few signatures and a database entry can give a man back his height. The next call came early afternoon. A name I didn't recognize, the Los Angeles area code. I almost let it go to voicemail, then decided I was done letting anything catch me off guard. I answered. The man on the other end spoke in a measured way, words clipped, steady. He introduced himself as Winfield Elliott, a private investigator out of L.A. He said my future son-in-law's name, slowly, like a man who has said a name too many times in court filings. He said he believed Jason had hurt me and that Jason had certainly hurt him. I didn't say anything for a beat. He continued. 2 years ago, he said, he partnered with Jason on a crypto startup called CryptoFlow. He brought the tech, the money, the relationships. Jason brought charm, a pitch deck, and a network of people who liked the sound of quick riches. 18 months later, Jason walked away with the company, moved the intellectual property into a new entity, and funneled money through accounts Winfield had never seen. $2 million in total, bleeding out in what Jason's attorney later called orderly asset reallocation. I pictured the memo line again in my head. Venue upgrade. A man who calls theft an upgrade is a man who has never learned the weight of a dollar. I asked Winfield why he was calling me. He said he'd heard about the size of my wedding contributions through a mutual contact. San Francisco is smaller than it pretends to be, and he suspected Jason wasn't done taking. He said he had documents, contracts, email chains, bank logs. He said he'd show me everything if I could meet him. He also said something that made my back straighten. He didn't believe in shouting in alleys. He believed in light. And he believed in timing. What kind of timing? I asked. He said a wedding reception, any reception, is a theater, which makes it a stage, and that the right truth, at the right moment, in the right tone, can shake a room more cleanly than any fist. I thought of Margaret then, the way she would tilt her head and ask, "What outcome do you want, Richard?" I said I wanted my daughter to see clearly. I said I wanted my name back. I said I wanted Jason to learn that a man can be kind and still carry iron. Winfield said he could help with that. We agreed to meet the next day, Sunday, in Los Angeles, a neutral place where we could go over the file. He gave me the address of his office on Wilshire. I wrote it on the same utility bill where I'd written the word boundary. Then I booked a flight on my laptop, a midday departure, no checked bag. I pulled an old leather overnight case from the closet, the one Margaret bought me when we took our 20th anniversary trip to Boston, and I insisted on carrying a suitcase older than our marriage. I placed the trust folder in it, alongside the deed copy and the bank's fraud claim number. I added a simple navy tie and a clean white shirt. I ironed them, though nobody would see me in them yet. It wasn't about appearance. It was about honoring the seriousness of my own plan. Sometime in the late afternoon, Emily called back. I let it roll to voicemail. She left a message saying she loved me and that I was making this bigger than it needed to be. She said money had complicated everything, as if money were a person at the table and not a tool you either respect or abuse. She said Jason was stressed, that big events required bold decisions, and that I needed to trust them to handle the flow. The flow. I played the message twice, then saved it. Not out of sentiment, out of record-keeping. I sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad and wrote down a timeline in neat engineer print. The date I paid the venue deposit, $15,000. The date I paid the caterer, $28,000. The florist, $12,000. The photographer, $9,000. The tuxedo rental gift for Jason's groomsmen, $1,800. The total line, $115,000, circled. I added the bank's withdrawal, $5,000, with a red star. Then I wrote 3 sentences in a separate column, not for the court, but for me. Money communicates. Boundaries matter. Respect is visible. Around dinner time, the doorbell rang. I checked the window and saw no one, just an envelope on the mat. When I opened the door, cool air rushed in and carried the envelope smell, toner, and paper. Inside was a cream card with gold script, hand-delivered. It was the invitation to the reception, the public one, the big one, the one that had been presented as our day. The calligraphy looked expensive. The RSVP line was pre-checked regretfully declines in a careful pen that tried too hard to look casual. I turned the card over and saw a small sticky note. Jason asked me to handle this, it read in looping handwriting that wasn't Emily's. Less awkward for everyone. I held the card as if it were a specimen and carried it to the kitchen trash. Then I stopped. I slid it instead into the pocket of my jacket. Not as a keepsake, as a prop. It rained after dark, one of those sudden Midwestern showers that rattles the gutters and makes the streetlights look like halos. I stood at the back door and watched the water beat on the grill cover and run down the slope of the yard toward the maple. I remembered, as clear as a photograph, a summer night when Emily was 12 and Margaret taught her to shuffle cards at this very table. She kept dropping them and laughing at herself. And Margaret said something I haven't thought of in years. "You don't need to be perfect," she told our daughter. "You just need to be steady. A steady hand can turn a whole game." I said it out loud now to the raindrops and the dark. A steady hand. I touched the edge of the trust folder. There it was. I slept. Not long, but cleanly. In the morning, I left for the airport before the traffic curled in on itself. I parked in long-term, rode the shuttle with 2 couples heading to someplace warm, and kept my face neutral while my mind sorted steps. On the plane, I wrote questions for Winfield. Names, dates, whether he'd filed with any agencies, what would stand up in a public exchange, what would sound like a personal vendetta, and what would sound like truth. I asked him in a text if he had any printed emails with dates early in the partnership, something that showed intent formed before disagreements could justify the split. He replied with a thumbs up and 3 words: "You'll have it." Los Angeles smelled like hot breaks and ocean even when you couldn't see water. Winfield's office sat 12 floors up in a building with a lobby that tried to look like money but couldn't quite hide the scuffs. He shook my hand like a man who had learned to read palms the hard way, not the lines, but the calluses. He laid out the files slowly. Company filings, operating agreements, a cap table that showed his stake diluting while Jason's grew, emails with subject lines like strategic pivot and temporary custody of IP, bank statements. The line that stood out to me most wasn't the big one. The day $240,000 left a corporate account for a personal one, though that made my breath hitch. It was a smaller one, a pattern of $5,000 and $7,000 and $9,000 over weeks, amounts that look harmless to people who like to call theft an upgrade. I felt my anger smooth itself into something else. A man can be furious and still precise. Precision is a kind of mercy. It leaves no extra wounds. We spoke about timing again. He said we didn't need to shout when we entered any room. We only needed to carry the right weight. He proposed an approach, calm, visible, unarguable. Show documents without waving them. Offer a sentence, not a speech. Address Emily first, not Jason. Give her a clear path to dignity. Don't trap her in front of other people without a door to step through. If you love her, he said, you give her a way to choose you. I sat with that for a long breath. I do, I said. More than anyone knows. He nodded. Then he opened a leather portfolio and slid something across the table. It was a simple sheet listing the names of Jason's business associates expected at the reception. A venture guy from New York, a lawyer from Boston, a cousin who brings money to deals nobody should be near. Winfield said those people cared about 2 things, reputation and distance from risk. If truth touched them at the right angle, they'd step back on their own. We wouldn't need to push. We worked the plan like 2 carpenters agree on framing. Step 1, make sure I was registered at the hotel under my full legal name. Step 2, dress in the kind of suit that makes people mistake you for someone with a courtroom downtown. Step 3, enter quietly, not sneaking, but as a father of the bride would. Step 4. Wait. Not at the bar. Not along the wall like a man hiding. Wait where a father might stand, in view, hands visible, steady. Step 5. When Jason approached, as he would, let him make the first mistake. Let him raise his voice. Let him perform. Then Step 6. Introduce my guest, with a tone reserved for neighborly barbecues. Step 7. Produce one document. Not a stack. Not a flurry. One page, with a date at the top and a signature near the bottom, and a sentence that lands like a level on a countertop. Let the room decide what's true. We didn't script anything past that. Life is better than scripts when truth walks in wearing good shoes. We shook on it. No flourish, no bravado. Two men with different kinds of scars, aligned by a simple word: enough. Outside, Los Angeles boiled, as it does on a Sunday when no one wants to move too fast. We parted at the elevator with a set time to meet in San Francisco the next day. I booked my flight on the curb, carry-on only. As the rideshare moved toward LAX, I looked down at my hands. They were my father's hands, knuckles like small stones, a scratch on the back from a rosebush I trimmed last week. The skin is thinner than when I was 30, but the grip is unchanged. I squeezed my fingers into a gentle fist and released them. They think I'm finished, I said under my breath. They think I'm alone, but the game has only begun. When I got home near midnight, the house did its small chorus again. Click, hum, pop. I hung my jacket by the door and set the leather case on the chair. I walked to the mantel and touched the corner of Margaret's frame. I'm going to your city tomorrow, I told her. Your favorite hill, the fair hotel with the big chandeliers. I may not dance, Maggie, but I will stand. I poured a finger of the whiskey she liked and let it sit on my tongue a moment before I swallowed. It burned just enough to remind me I was alive. I put the glass in the sink and looked out the window at the yard. The moon hung over the oak like a pale coin, honest and whole. I slept for a few hours and woke before the alarm. It was still dark when I sat at the kitchen table and copied the plan one more time onto a 3x5 card. Not because I needed to memorize anything, but because writing makes things true to me. Plane at 9. Land by noon. Check into the Fairmont by 1. Meet Winfield in the lobby at 1:30. If asked at the door, say, I'm the bride's father. If pressed, smile. Don't raise your voice. Keep your posture. When Jason speaks, listen to the end. Then say one sentence. Jason, before I leave, meet my guest. I slid the card into my wallet beside a photo of Emily, age 8, with the pumpkin. I pressed the leather until I felt both cards. Then I stood and dressed in the suit I'd ironed. Navy, white shirt, polished shoes so clean I could see the lamp reflected in them. I shaved, not a single nick. I combed what hair I have left and smiled at the man in the mirror. I recognized him again. On the way to the airport, I called the bank and checked the status. The freeze held, the claim was open, no new activity. The agent told me my verbal password had already been challenged once that morning. Someone had tried to add a new external account. The boundary had held. I thanked her. I closed my eyes for a second at a red light and let the relief move through me like warm water. Then I called Linda and thanked her for the speed. She said the recorder had accepted the trust deed without comment and that the fraud alerts were live. She reminded me gently to put a copy of my ID and the trust certification in the hotel safe when I arrived. You don't need them, she said, until you do. By the time the plane banked over the bay, the sky had cleared so sharply it looked polished. The city spread out like a silver circuit board, wires and lights and bridges connecting bright nodes. I felt my heart beat in the old rhythm again, the one I had when I was 30, and sure that trying mattered more than anything. At the hotel, a bellman opened the brass door and called me sir in a way that didn't feel like theater. I checked in under my full name. The clerk typed and smiled and handed me a key in a small folder with my name printed on it. I looked down at the font and thought, that's still me. Upstairs, I laid out the portfolio on the desk and tested the lamp. Good light, solid chair. A man could write something important at a desk like this. I placed the one-page document Winfield had printed on top, the email chain second, and the bank record third. Not because we'd need three things. One would do. But because readiness settles the hand. My phone buzzed. A text from Winfield. Lobby, 1:30, black portfolio. I texted back, navy suit, steady hand. Then I put my palm flat on the desk and whispered the truth I wanted in my bones when I stepped into whatever room life opened next. They think I lost, I said, each word slow. But the game just started. I slipped the portfolio under my arm, locked the door, and headed for the elevator. The doors slid open, and I stepped in. My reflection stared back at me and brushed steel. Older, yes. Lines deeper, yes. But the eyes were the same as the day I promised Margaret I would be the kind of man a daughter could count on. The car stopped at the lobby, and the doors opened to marble and light. Somewhere beyond, a ballroom waited. Somewhere beyond that, a man practiced a smile in a mirror. I didn't need a smile. I needed the truth. And a room. I crossed the lobby floor, each step a small claim of ground I'd almost given up last week when a cheerful voice told me I wasn't invited to my own child's future. The concierge glanced up and nodded, the kind of nod that says, I see a father and I see a purpose. I nodded back. On the far side of the room, near a table with a vase so tall it almost touched the chandelier, Winfield stood with the black portfolio at his side. He looked like a man who'd spent more hours in court hallways than he'd ever wanted. We didn't shake hands this time. We didn't need to. He tipped his chin, and I tipped mine. Two men facing one story, one stage, 1 hour. Then he said the word I needed most to hear. Ready? I answered with the sentence that had been keeping me upright since dawn. Yes, I said. Let's go change the room. If you're still watching and find this story interesting, please comment 2 below to let me know you're here with me. I slid my arms into the new navy suit and felt the cloth settle like a quiet kind of armor. The shoulders held me upright. The collar sat where it should. When I tightened the knot of the tie, the mirror sent back a man I still knew. Older, yes, but steady, shaved clean, shoes shining enough to throw back the hotel lamp. I fastened the brown leather band of Margaret's old watch and listened to the second-hand circle with a patient click. Time was on my side tonight, not because it moved slowly, but because I had finally stepped in rhythm with it. I lifted the portfolio from the desk, black, simple, zipped, and slid in 3 pages I'd placed in careful order. The early email, the bank movement, and a new sheet on county letterhead with yesterday's date. I touched each one the way a man touches fence posts he set with his own hands. The plan wasn't fancy. It didn't need to be. Light and timing, Winfield had said. Truth walks better when it's not dragging a performance behind it. I cupped the back of Margaret's frame, kissed my fingers, and touched the glass. I'll be steady, I told her. You always liked me best that way. Downstairs, the Fairmont's lobby breathed brass and polished stone. Light fell in warm pools from the chandeliers and made the marble glow like poured honey. Couples drifted past in tuxedos and gowns. Someone laughed in the way people laugh when they are dressed up and sure the night belongs to them. A harpist played somewhere I couldn't see, and the vibrations traveled through the floor into my shoes. I moved with my hands easy at my sides, neither hurrying nor lingering, the way a father ought to move on his daughter's night. The bellman opened a glass door with a gloved hand. "Evening, sir," he said. His voice carried a kindness that didn't feel forced. "Evening," I answered, and the word tasted like something I hadn't had in a while. My place. Just before the ballroom doors, a young man with an earpiece and a clipboard stopped me. His smile had the careful politeness of a maitre d' who has practiced bad news. He asked for my name. I said it, full and plain. He found it, then frowned. A red line cut through it as if someone had sliced the paper with anger. "I'm sorry, sir," he said. "Per the groom's instructions, you're not on tonight's list." He lowered his voice as if volume could soften humiliation. For a breath I felt heat rise the way it does when a man is told to step off his own porch. Then the heat cooled into something harder. I leaned close enough for only him to hear. "Young man," I said, "you do your job and I'll do mine. I'm the bride's father. If there is a problem, the doorman can call the police, and we'll let them decide which of us belongs at his own daughter's wedding." He looked at me and understood that I wasn't bluffing. He slid aside. I put a hand on the brass handle and opened the door myself. "No one crosses my name off my daughter," I said, "but only to the heir." Inside, the ballroom was a kingdom of light. 300 guests shimmered under crystal, voices mixing with a 12-piece orchestra that played a song old enough to make the older couples sway. Vases of white lilies and pale roses stood like small trees in the center of each table. Waiters moved with practiced geometry, trays level, eyes gentle. It smelled like lilies and floor polish and money. I stood on the edge of the parquet and let the sight soak in. This was where $115,000 of my retirement had gone, dressed well and smiling for cameras. For a heartbeat, I let the anger press its thumb into my chest. Then I put a hand over the spot the way Margaret used to and told my body the truth. Anger isn't the tool tonight. Steadiness is. He saw me before I decided where to stand. Jason lifted his champagne flute halfway to his mouth and stopped as if a wire had tightened across his path. Surprise moved across his face, then calculation. Then the quick, hard set that always shows up when a man decides charm won't work. He walked toward me without haste, as if he owned the distance and could price it by the step. People slid aside for him because tuxedos teach people to slide. He stopped close enough for me to smell a cologne that wanted to be a job title. "You're not welcome," he said through his teeth, lips still shaped for smiling if someone took a photo. "Leave now." "That's your line," I answered, keeping my voice low. "Here's mine. I'm Emily's father." I did not look away. I did not move. He leaned in, jaw tight. "You signed the checks, Richard. You can go now." He smiled, the social kind, the smile people use when they want the room to believe something isn't happening. I let him finish enjoying his own bravado, then I said the sentence I had carried across the country. The checks were the last papers I signed without looking twice. Today I brought pages that don't belong to you. I kept my breathing slow, steady. Across the floor, a figure in a dark suit took shape at the edge of a group of guests. Winfield Elliott didn't rush. He simply arrived, the way a fact arrives. When Jason recognized him, the groom's knuckles paled against the stem of his glass. He swallowed in a way the throat gives away. The first word he spoke wasn't a word for me. It was a name whispered like a bad memory. Winfield. Then louder, with a showman's tone. "Winfield." What a surprise. Nearby conversations leaned in by instinct. Emily turned from the head table, saw us, and started across the dance floor, her dress carrying light like water. Winfield stopped beside me and dipped his chin as if greeting a neighbor he once trusted. He didn't offer a hand. He held the black portfolio like a quiet fact. "Just a moment for clarity," he said in a room voice that didn't need volume. Jason tried to steer us toward the hall. "Family only," he muttered. "Exactly," I said. Emily had reached us by then, bouquet set aside. She looked at me first, then at Jason, then at Winfield. "Dad?" she whispered. "We'll be brief," I told her. "And honest." Winfield opened the portfolio and drew out a single sheet. No performance, no stack to impress. One page, placed on a cocktail table, a waiter abandoned without protest. The chandelier found it. The paper looked like any office printout until you read the subject line: Exit Strategy and IP Custody. The date was early, the second month of a supposed partnership. The addressees included Jason's counsel. The language was clinical and cold. It outlined how to move intellectual property out of one company into a new one, where the partner who funded and built the thing would no longer have keys. I didn't say a word. I watched the room read that subject line over my shoulder. Jason let out a small laugh that didn't fit his tuxedo. "Anyone can print an email," he said. "Context matters." We pivoted. Winfield turned the page so the court stamp caught the light. He didn't address Jason. He let Emily see the header, the date, and the addressees. I watched her read. Color rose, then drained. "Jason," she said, voice flat. "What am I looking at?" He tried innovation, persecution, misunderstanding, the usual ladder. He reached for her hand. She took a half step back and looked at me. Winfield laid down a second page. Numbers. A bank reconciliation that showed money leaving a corporate account in slices that added up to $2 million. Memo lines dressed in words like transition and holdback tried to make theft sound technical. The page was initialed and time-stamped. The couple beside us took one small step away from Jason without moving their feet. The room knew what it was seeing. Jason tried a different tone. He lowered his voice as if softness could make facts retreat. He said this was ancient history. He said I was making a spectacle. He said I had ruined his evening and my daughter's. He told me fathers struggled to let go. He used the word boundaries without a trace of the weight Linda had put into that word when she moved my house into a living trust. I let him finish. Hard choices are part of building, he said, palms open like he wanted to pass out charity. Hard for whom? I asked. I let the question hang until it turned the air heavier. Then I added the part that mattered to me tonight. Trust is math, Jason, and math keeps score. I took out a single sheet on county letterhead, yesterday's deed, the recorder's seal, the parcel number. My house is now held inside my revocable living trust. Nobody can touch the title without my signature. I set it beside the bank sheet and added my bank's letter freezing external transfers. 45,000 protected, I said. The 5 he grabbed are under review. The next attempt meets a password he doesn't know, and the house is not for sale. For the first time that night, something in Jason's posture sagged. The muscles around his jaw worked. He reached for my sleeve as if possession could be borrowed by touch. I took a small step back, and he caught nothing. His voice climbed a flight it couldn't climb down. "You ridiculous old man," he said, the mask gone. "You think you can wave paper and undo what I've built?" His laugh broke in the middle. The room heard the crack. The orchestra stopped. Forks paused over plates. Emily didn't flinch. Her hand went to the necklace at her throat, the one Margaret promised she would wear, then fell to her side. Her eyes were clear in a way I hadn't seen in months. She slid the engagement ring from her finger. Light caught and then failed to catch. She placed the ring beside the papers as neatly as someone filing a notice. Her hand trembled, only once. "The wedding is over," she said. Not loud, not theatrical, clear. The sentence carried through crystal and music stands, and the wide-open door where the doorman was pretending not to listen. A low sound spread through the room like air leaving a bellows. Someone whispered, "Oh." Someone else whispered, "Good." Jason lunged for the table, fingers snatching at paper and metal. Winfield moved a half step, not aggressive, simply precise, and the pages stayed where they belonged. 2 venue managers in dark suits appeared out of nowhere, the way venue managers do when a party needs a quiet correction. Jason's parents arrived a beat later, both faces white under their makeup. His father put a hand on his arm and said his name in a tone that sounded like a lifetime of disappointment being folded and put away. His mother hissed that this was not the time, not the place. "There is no time and no place where theft becomes leadership," Winfield said, almost to himself, but the nearby tables heard it. He searched for a new place to stand and could not find one. The cameras he had hired would not save him. Lenses do not love panic. He tried to gather dignity from the floor and discovered he had none left that didn't belong to a costume. He turned toward the doors and walked out. That practiced stride men use when they pretend choice and failure are the same thing. His parents followed. The venue managers shadowed them at a polite distance. The doors sighed shut. Silence landed like snow, soft and total. I looked at Emily. The tremor had left her fingers. Her eyes were clear in the way lakes are clear when the wind finally stops. She stepped into me and set her forehead against my chest, the way she did when she was 8, and scraped both knees on the driveway and pretended it didn't hurt until she reached the kitchen. "Dad," she said into my shirt. "Thank you." I put my palm on the back of her head and let the weight of her grief and relief settle. "I'm here," I said. "I always was." Around us, the circle loosened. Guests drifted back to chairs but kept watching, the way people watch after a storm when they want to believe the clouds will not sneak back over the hill. A woman I didn't know touched my elbow and whispered, "Good for you." A man in a silver tie said, "Took guts." I didn't need their approval, but I understood the need that made them offer it. Winfield gathered the documents with a veteran's care and slid them back into the portfolio. He handed me the necklace. I held it a moment and pictured Margaret's throat, then Emily's. I closed my hand around the chain. "When you want," I told my daughter. "Not because of a plan, because of a promise." She nodded once, tears bright and clean. The hotel manager approached with the careful concern of someone trained to remove friction without erasing faces. He said he was sorry for any distress and asked whether we would like a quiet room to step into. I said yes. Emily slipped her arm through mine, and we walked out of the ballroom together. In the hallway, the light was softer, the carpet deep enough to hush a tired man's feet. Emily stopped halfway to the elevators and asked if I knew my name was crossed off at the door. "A boy with a radio showed me the red line," I said. She shut her eyes, then opened them. "I'm sorry," she said. "I should have seen it sooner." "You saw it when you had to," I answered. "That's enough." Upstairs, I poured water and handed her the cold glass. She held it with both hands, like a child after a long run. "I froze the savings," I said, not to show off but to steady the ground under her. 45,000 preserved. He took 5 without asking. The bank has a case number and a password. The house is in the trust. If anyone sneezes near the deed, I get a message. She took a breath that sounded like a knot loosening. "I thought he was just decisive," she said quietly. "I called it leadership." "He was decisive," I answered, "about your father's wallet. Leadership is different." Winfield stood near the window, hands folded. He told her he had filed a formal complaint months ago and that tonight had nothing to do with courtrooms. Tonight was about seeing clearly in a room designed to blur. "You don't owe anyone a story tonight," he said. "You owe yourself rest." Emily smiled at him, the grateful kind of smile women give men who use their strength in the right direction. I ordered soup and bread. When room service arrived, the steam that rose from the bowls smelled like thyme and sage. We ate in a small quiet, the kind you can only hear when the noise you carried out of a ballroom finally drains. After she finished, Emily stared at the city lights for a while, the bay black and patient beyond the buildings. "I told Aunt Nora I was sure he just wanted a sleek ceremony," she said. "Now I hear my own voice and it sounds like somebody else," I told her. We all rehearse the version of a person we want to believe in until the performance falls apart. She asked what would happen next. "There will be fallout," I said. "People who loved his pitch will suddenly remember they had doubts. The money that likes his heat will prefer the shade. You are not responsible for any of that." She nodded and wiped under one eye with the side of her finger. "I can live with that," she said. "I want quiet." She rose to go to her own room and paused at the door. "You were steady," she said. "I didn't know how much I needed steady until I saw it." I told her what Margaret told her once at the kitchen table while teaching her to shuffle a deck without spilling cards. "A steady hand turns the whole game." She pressed her lips together around a smile and left. The hallway softened the sound of her steps and then gave me back the quiet. Winfield and I stood at the window for a few minutes. The city looked like a circuit board from 12 floors up, little paths of light carrying signals. "You let the room speak," he said. "That's rare," I told him. He had timed the fact well. He nodded once. "Clarity makes its own weather," he answered, and picked up the portfolio. "I'll be in touch. There will be follow-through." He shook my hand and let the door whisper shut behind him. I took off Margaret's watch and laid it beside the sink. I washed my face and watched the water flatten and run, a simple thing that felt like a blessing. In the mirror I saw the same lines I had this morning, and maybe 2 more, but the set of my mouth was different. It had stopped bracing for the worst. At the desk, I pulled a hotel notepad and wrote 4 lines in neat engineer block. House secured. Money frozen. Truth spoken. Daughter safe. I folded the paper and tucked it into my wallet beside the photo of Emily holding a pumpkin larger than her chest. Then I turned off the lamp. Sleep didn't come fast, but when it did, it came honestly. Just before it reached me, I spoke to the dark the way a man speaks to the person who still hears him. "Maggie," I whispered. "They thought I was weak. They thought I was alone. They were wrong." The room answered by breathing with me until the numbers on the digital clock forgot to matter. The feeling of being dismissed, of being pushed out of your own life, is painful, isn't it? If you believe that every person deserves to be recognized and protected by the truth, comment the keyword, justice. Now, let's see what they will do to change that. If you're still watching and find this story interesting, please comment 3 below to let me know you're here with me. I remember the way the room fell silent after Emily slipped the ring from her finger and set it down on the table for all to see. That single gesture carried more weight than any speech could have. Jason's face turned gray, his parents whispering frantically, trying to shield him from the stares of 300 guests who had just witnessed the collapse of an empire built on lies. They left the ballroom in a rush, their fine clothes rustling like torn pride, their backs bent under the weight of humiliation. For years, they had looked at me as though I were nothing but a burden, an old man to be brushed aside. Now, they were the ones walking out in disgrace, heads bowed as society prepared to shut its doors on them. Emily stayed. She was trembling when she turned to me, her eyes swollen with tears that smeared her makeup into streaks of pain. She threw her arms around me and pressed her face against my chest. "Dad," she whispered, her voice breaking as if the words themselves carried thorns. "I was blind. Thank you for saving me." My arms closed around her, and in that moment the weight of betrayal lifted just enough for me to breathe again. I stroked her hair like I had when she was a little girl, afraid of the dark, and I answered, with the only truth I had left. "You're safe now. That's all that matters." The days that followed moved faster than I expected. Winfield was relentless, and I silently thanked God for that. He delivered the evidence to the authorities, the documents, the recordings, the financial trails that showed Jason's so-called ventures were nothing but fraud. CryptoFlow wasn't just a bad investment. It was a scam that had bled investors of millions. The regulators pounced, and the story spread across every newspaper and evening news show. Jason's face appeared under headlines that screamed words like fraud, scheme, indictment. He tried to spin it, tried to paint himself as misunderstood, but the weight of proof was too heavy. Within a week, he was finished. His name, once spoken in rooms of power, was now spat out like poison. I met with Linda, my lawyer, to make sure every thread of protection around my home and accounts was tight. We sat in her office surrounded by books that smelled of dust and authority, and she confirmed what I already suspected. Jason had no hold on my assets. The house was mine. The accounts were secure. He had nothing left to leech from me. That news brought relief, but also clarity. I had protected what was mine, yes, but I realized I no longer wanted to live under the same roof where betrayal had festered. Every room of that old house carried both love and pain, and the balance had shifted too far. I made a decision right there with Linda. I would sell it. The sale went quickly. The market was good, and the brick home Margaret and I had bought 40 years earlier fetched $700,000. Out of that, I set aside $200,000 to create the Margaret Foundation, a scholarship for young women studying nursing, because that had been her dream before she chose to stay home and raise Emily. Signing those papers felt like a final gift to her, something that carried her name into the future. The rest I placed carefully into secure accounts, enough to keep me steady, enough to make sure no one could ever threaten me with poverty or manipulation again. I moved into a modest apartment by the park. It was small, just 2 bedrooms, a balcony, and a kitchen that smelled of fresh paint instead of old regret. But it was mine. From the window, I could see children chasing soccer balls, old couples walking hand in hand, and trees swaying as if they too had survived storms. I furnished it lightly. Margaret's photo on the mantel, a leather chair that had carried me through grief, a table where I could drink my morning coffee in peace. The silence there wasn't heavy anymore. It was calm, like a river that had finally found its course. Meanwhile, Jason and his family sank further. They left their large home and moved into a cramped rental on the edge of town. Friends who once clung to their wealth no longer returned calls. Investors pursued them in court. Winfield said the cases might drag on for years, but the verdict was already written in the eyes of society. They were finished. I heard rumors of Jason wandering the city, trying to find someone who still believed his stories. No one did. The man who once told me I was irrelevant now stood invisible in the very world he had tried to control. Emily visited often. She would sit on my balcony, staring at the park below. Sometimes she brought flowers, just herself, worn and quiet. She said little at first, but one evening she turned to me with tears brimming. "I want to make things right, Dad. I want to earn your trust again." I looked at her, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't see betrayal in her eyes. I saw hope. I put my hand over hers and said, "Trust has to be earned back, but we'll start with honesty." Her shoulders shook as she nodded. That was all I needed, for her to understand that forgiveness was not free, that blood didn't erase betrayal, that respect had to be rebuilt brick by brick. Life became simple, and simplicity was a gift I hadn't expected. I woke each morning, brewed coffee, and sat by the window as the sun rose over the park. I joined a community group that planted flowers along the pathways, my hands deep in soil, my heart lighter with each bloom. I spent afternoons reading, rediscovering the novels Margaret loved, feeling her presence in every line. Evenings, I walked through the park, listening to children's laughter, to the rustle of leaves, to the rhythm of a world that kept moving no matter what wounds it carried. I whispered to myself often, "I don't need them anymore. I have myself. I have peace." Jason tried once more to reach me. He called late one night, his voice shaking, trying to apologize, to explain, to beg. I let the phone ring until the machine picked up. His words spilled out, desperate and hollow, but I never returned the call. That was my boundary. That was my freedom. Emily asked if I would ever speak to him again. I shook my head and said, "No, some bridges are burned for good. He chose his path." It wasn't anger anymore. It was clarity. To keep my dignity, I had to keep my distance. The lessons settled in slowly, like evening shadows stretching long across the grass. For parents like me, the warning was clear. Love your children, but don't blind yourself with it. Listen to the signs. Protect yourself, even from those closest to you. For children, the message was sharper. Don't betray the ones who gave everything for you. Gratitude is not optional. And for people in general, the truth stood tall. Greed can rot a family from the inside, but truth has a way of shining through the cracks. Lies crumble. Integrity lasts. I ended one evening on my balcony with Margaret's photo in my hand. The park below was alive with laughter, the sky glowing with the last light of day. I whispered, "Margaret, we made it. Justice was served." The words filled the room, not with sorrow, but with peace. I felt her presence in the quiet, not as a ghost of pain, but as a companion of strength. And as the weeks turned into months, I found myself ready for something new. A flyer on the community bulletin board caught my eye. A call for volunteers to mentor young people struggling with finances, teaching them how to save, how to avoid traps like the ones Jason had fallen into. I took it down and folded it into my pocket. I knew this would be the next chapter, because my story wasn't just about loss or betrayal anymore. It was about survival, dignity, and the reminder that even when blood betrays you, you can still choose who you become. I had lost much, but I had gained myself, and that was enough. I wake each morning now to the sound of birdsong drifting through the open window of my small apartment. The park across the street glows with the first light of day, and I can smell the grass wet with dew. It is a modest place compared to the house I once owned, but it feels like freedom. It feels like I finally stepped out of the shadow of betrayal and into a light I can claim as my own. The walls here do not carry the echoes of Jason's deceit or Emily's blind trust. They carry only my breath, my laughter, and the quiet that belongs to me. I joined the community center down the road. Twice a week, I sit with a circle of men and women my age. Some of them are widowed, some divorced, some simply alone. We play cards, we share stories about the past, and sometimes we just sit in silence, letting the comfort of companionship wash over us. I found myself laughing again, not the forced laughter I wore when I tried to ignore the cracks in my family, but a laugh that came from somewhere deep and clean. It reminded me that joy does not always need a grand stage. Sometimes it lives in the shuffle of cards, the warmth of coffee, or the nod of an old friend who understands without words. The apartment cost me $200,000, paid in full from the sale of my house. It faces the park where children play and where seniors walk laps with determination. From my balcony, I see life unfolding each day. That sight steadies me more than any fortune ever could. I know the rest of the money is safe, invested carefully, and part of it locked forever in the scholarship fund carrying Margaret's name. That fund has already begun to work. Just last week, I received a letter written in careful penmanship from a young nursing student. She thanked the Margaret Foundation for covering her tuition. She said she would carry my wife's name into her work, into every patient she helped. I held that letter in my hands for a long time, reading it again and again, my eyes misting over. It was proof that something good had grown from soil that had once been poisoned by greed. Jason, meanwhile, has fallen far. His company collapsed under the weight of the fraud investigation. Investors pulled their money, lawsuits circled like hawks, and the lavish home he once flaunted was sold off at auction. He now lives in a small rental apartment, not much better than the places he once mocked others for living in. I hear he lost most of his so-called friends, the ones who had been happy to drink his wine and boast about his ventures. He sent me a letter last month, his handwriting unsteady. It was an apology, filled with excuses, filled with lines about lessons learned. I did not reply. I placed it in a drawer and let it sit there, because my peace does not depend on his regret. I whispered to myself as I closed the drawer, I don't need their apology. I have my life. Emily is still in my life. She visits on Sundays, sometimes with a basket of groceries, sometimes with nothing but her presence. We walk through the park together. She talks about her work, about small joys she rediscovers now that the fog of Jason's influence has lifted. She is rebuilding, and I allow her that chance, but I keep my boundaries firm. Trust, I told her, must be earned back, and she accepted that truth with grace. We are father and daughter again, but now with honesty between us instead of illusions. As I live this new life, the lessons from the storm become clearer. For parents, I would say, love your children deeply, but don't let love blind you. Protect yourself. Set boundaries. It is not unkind, it is necessary. For children, the message is even sharper. Don't betray those who gave everything for you. Gratitude is the foundation of family, and once it crumbles, rebuilding takes more than words. And for anyone in this modern world, remember this. Money can be stolen, but character cannot. Dignity cannot. Those are the real inheritances we leave behind, and they are worth more than gold. I see Jason's downfall as a mirror of his choices. He wanted power, control, and wealth without work or integrity. Now he has isolation, shame, and a name that closes doors instead of opening them. I have no joy in his suffering, only clarity. It is the natural end of greed unchecked. In contrast, my life is quieter, simpler, but filled with meaning. That contrast tells me everything I need to know. The scholarship fund continues to grow. More letters arrive, each one from a student carrying Margaret's legacy forward. One wrote, I promise to treat every patient with dignity, just as your wife must have done in her life. I folded that letter and placed it beside Margaret's photo. It felt like she was still here, nodding, proud. These small events, these quiet affirmations, remind me that I am no longer defined by betrayal, but by what I chose to build from it. One afternoon, while walking through the park, I passed a bench where an elderly man was sitting alone, his hands shaking slightly. I sat beside him, and we spoke. He told me his son had cut him off after taking his savings. The story was painfully familiar. I listened, nodded, and when he finished, I told him, You still have yourself. That's more than enough. He smiled through tears, and I realized in that moment that pain shared can become strength multiplied. I joined a small support group for parents who had faced betrayal from their own children. We meet in the community center once a month, and though the stories are heavy, the room is filled with understanding. We are proof that even the deepest wounds can heal, and that dignity remains unbroken. Every evening I sit on my balcony with a cup of tea. The park is golden in the setting sun, children laughing as their parents call them home. Couples stroll, dogs tugging at their leashes. I breathe it all in and think to myself, I finally found where I belong. Each day is a reminder that I chose peace, and peace chose me back. Jason tried one last time. A friend told me he had sent another letter, left at the front desk of the community center. I didn't read it. I didn't need to. That chapter of my life is closed. I whispered into the evening air, I don't need their apology. I have my dignity. And the wind carried the words away, as if Margaret herself had answered, "That's enough." Now I know the truth. Family isn't just blood. It's respect, loyalty, and love. That is the core of it. Without those, blood means nothing more than ink on a certificate. With those, even strangers can become kin. That is the lesson I will carry, and the one I hope others hear when they listen to my story. As the sun dips below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, I whisper a final thought to Margaret's photo on the mantel. Each day is proof I chose right. Justice was served, and now peace remains. I rise from my chair, stretch my back, and smile. Tomorrow will come with its own light, its own promise, and I am ready. The story has come to an end. I hope it has brought you valuable lessons and insights. If you enjoyed this content, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next video. Goodbye, and see you again.